Welcome to the Love Energetics Podcast. This is the space where science, spirituality, and mindset work become one with the mission of empowering you to reach your full potential and live the life you daydream about. This podcast is all about helping you achieve a high self-image that awakens you to your innate power and allows you to expand to higher levels than you thought were possible. I'm your host, Marea, a scientifically trained intuitive, manifestation coach, and neuroscience expert that shares the knowledge and tools that will ascend you to the highest levels of growth and expansion. In each episode, I'm going to be infusing motivation and inspiration that you've been looking for to go after the deep levels of fulfillment you've been secretly craving. And with that, let's get into another great episode. And so for today's topic, we are going to be talking about why you're not where you want to be in life. This is a topic that hits close to home. This is something I've spent a lot of time learning and embodying and practicing throughout my spiritual awakening journey, starting from my first round of spiritual awakening back in 2021. And, I took it to deeper levels this year to really bring it into other areas of life and really embody it more on like a holistic level. I find that a lot of people, myself included, we're really good at compartmentalizing our lives, which can be good in some ways, but in other ways it's not. You'll usually find that one area of life comes easier for you and another life is more difficult. For example, for me, for the majority of my life, my dating life and relationships that I went through were difficult for me, and my career in HR always came so easily to me. For example, when I was in college, my senior year, I got the internship that I wanted. I got the job waiting lined up for me right when I got out of college. It was the exact job I wanted. Like, it was as if I knew how to manifest this. It was like I knew I wanted to go into a leadership development program that gave me different rotations in human resources. I knew that I wanted to do this specific one at a company, a well-known big corporate company in Connecticut, so that I could live home and commute. I knew that there was someone who was high up in the company that worked for my school, or not worked for my school. She went to my school. She was an alumni, and so I had set this intention that I was going to meet her at a networking event, and I was going to discuss the opportunity with her, and that would be my opening to get this job. And that's exactly what happened. I went to a networking event. I went to this networking event, and I actually couldn't even get close to talking to this woman because a lot of people wanted to talk to her. So I was talking to other people, and I ended up talking to her college roommate, who ultimately introduced me to the person I wanted to talk to the whole time, and spoke with her and basically just got the job right off the bat, a job that a lot of people had applied to and only had a couple slots for this program. And then ultimately, when I left that job, I had a different job that I really wanted. I found the right connection, came right to me, got that job. The other person that was the leader of that team, I had a connection to as well. So everything just flowed so easily. That was a long-winded story, but I really just wanted to show you how easy my HR career really was for me for all of those years. I mean, like 8 years spent in human resources. It really truly came pretty easily to me, while my love life was not easy for me. So the moral of the story is, for the areas that you aren't where you want to be in life, there's two reasons for that. And a lot of times we don't really connect the dots because we see some areas of life where things are really working out for us, and we see other areas of life that aren't working out for us, and we just assume it's something outside of us that is making that area of our life difficult versus something within us. When it's all areas of life, it's a little easier to connect. So I think that's why a lot of times we miss this. But essentially, when we're struggling in one or more areas of life and we're not where we want to be, it comes down to two concepts that are one and the same. They relate. You've probably heard me mention them before, since it's the basis of the podcast name. But the two concepts are: you lack unconditional self-love, and usually if you have one, you have the other, and you have a low self-image. So essentially you lack unconditional self-love and you have a low self-image. And the reason I brought up the life compartmentalization is because you could very well have a high self-image like I did. I had a high self-image in HR. I don't really know why. Like maybe it was because I felt like I had a good education and I had one thing work out for me, so I just assumed all the other ones would. Like that's what happens a lot of times with the way that people create beliefs is like, okay, I got that first HR internship easily. I can get the next one easily. And then I got that one easily. So I even got the other one easy as well. So a lot of times that could happen. A lot of times we don't realize that we lack unconditional self-love or that we have a low self-image because in some areas of life, the areas of life that might come easier to us, we have a high self-image or at least like a good baseline of a self-image. Usually you don't have a high self-image unless you spent a lot of time intentionally working on it. It's just not the way that we were raised. The way that we were typically raised, the way that our parents were raised, so they taught us, and the way that society kind of works, it's not set up to set people with a high self-image and high levels of confidence and beliefs in themselves. It's not a 100% one size fits all, but typically people do not have high self-image unless they are a unicorn or unless they intentionally work on it. Anyways, so those are the two things that are holding you back. You will find that the things that come easier to you, you probably have at least a decent self-image on. And the things that are more difficult, not working out for you as much in life, you have a low self-image on. And typically the unconditional self-love piece, if you're lacking that, it usually shows up in certain places more than others too. And it really is dependent on people's life experiences. It depends on what they were taught growing up, and it depends on what specific circumstances they've had that they create stories and memories on. So that's why it's different for every single person. And that's where like intuition can be really beneficial is, for example, when I, as an intuitive energy reader, I am able to intuitively look into my energy or someone else's energy to see where there are lower levels of unconditional self-love or lower levels of self-image in certain areas of life and where these perceptions are coming from. Like you can just get more information out of the problem because a lot of times we aren't even truly aware just how much we lack unconditional self-love and just how low our self-image is because it's so subconscious. And a lot of people don't really even want to face that. You know, there's more of the ego playing the role there where, you don't want to like admit to yourself, oh yeah, I don't love myself. Like it's not really something that your ego is going to let you consciously think too much unless you bring that awareness in, which I'll discuss later on in this episode. But to summarize the two concepts, it's you're not where you want to be in life because you lack unconditional self-love in at least one or more areas of your life, and you have a low self-image in at least one or more areas of your life. So I will use my own personal experience to kind of talk through this a little bit more. To kind of just start off, I'd like to define what I mean by unconditional self-love and self-image, just to kind of get that baseline foundation and understanding of the concept. So unconditional self-love is not, I don't really think it's described the right way in most of the ways that people talk about it in society. I think a lot of people can kind of guess what unconditional self-love kind of means, but not the deeper meaning to it. So unconditional self-love means you love yourself unconditionally, right? You would think that's common sense. The unconditional part, right, is you love yourself no matter what. However, as common sense as that sounds, we're actually in society and the way that we were raised and the way that just how the world tends to work and how we're typically taught to live life is we actually learn more about conditional love. Like if you think about it, when you grew up, you wanted to get good grades because you wanted to impress your parents. You know, that's a common one. Or even honestly as like a parent. So like I think as a kid, you want to do things a lot of the times growing up You think that by doing certain things, your parents will love you more, or the teacher will love you more, or your friends will love you more if you do something. Like, it's always, if I do this, I will be loved. That's kind of the way that we're taught growing up. And even if you think about it, most people bring this through their adulthood life. Like, there are so many parents that do things for their children because they want love from their children. So they're also still operating from that conditional love model as well. So if we can't understand unconditional love for others, how are we going to be able to understand unconditional love for ourselves? So essentially, we've been grown up with the idea of conditional love. That's one piece, right? Is the unconditional versus the conditional. And so the way to kind of understand unconditional is conditional. So the way to kind of understand the difference between conditional and unconditional is conditional means the more good, the more love you get. The less bad, the more love you get. So it's like stacking up the positives and minimizing the negatives. That's what you can kind of see conditional love as. And I think and then unconditional love is loving yourself no matter what, right? So that means that unconditional love would be seeing the equal amounts of positives and equal amounts of negatives and still loving yourself anyways. That self-love piece, right? The unconditional love, or unconditional love for somebody else beside yourself. You would see all the positives and the negatives and still love them anyways. It's all about balance, and you'll find in a lot of the things I teach about the way energy works, the way the universe works, it's all about having a balance. And you can see that in so many ways, the way nature works, right? Like, think about your body temperature, right? Your body temperature is supposed to be at a 98.6. And if you dip below that or you dip above that, if you have a fever, your body's off balance. So your body is sweating, trying to eliminate toxins to bring your body temperature back into balance. If you're cold, your body shivers to warm you up, to bring you back into balance. With weather, when it's too hot out, a thunderstorm happens to bring the temperature and the humidity back into balance. Just all of that stuff. The universe is all about balance. So that doesn't change with unconditional self-love. So the goal and the ultimate definition there of unconditional self-love means that you see equal amounts of positives and negatives and view it as perfect. You don't try to change it. You don't try to add in more negatives and take out, no. You don't try to add in more positives and take out the negatives. You accept and look at both. Both. You look at both. Most of us are not operating that way. If you lack unconditional self-love, you are probably living for other people because you want to please others, right? Because you learned that conditional love operating way of being from when you were a kid to receive love from your parents. You did things that you thought would gain their love. Gain more love from them, or you do things that you think you should do to feel validated, because if you feel validated, if you think you can, this is where people pleasing comes in. If you do something to please someone else because you want them to like you, that's also conditional love, and that's putting that person ahead of yourself. So that's not loving yourself if you're doing things to the detriment of your well-being to please others. So essentially, when you are doing those types of things, so when you are living for other people, you're people-pleasing, you're doing something for validation or for something in return in some type of way, that means that you lack unconditional self-love, which means that you see too many negatives in yourself and not enough positives. So you are out of balance. So lacking unconditional self-love makes you out of balance with how you perceive yourself. You are out of love when you are out of balance. When you see too many negatives, you are out of love with yourself. So for example, someone with that lacks unconditional self-love would take it from the perspective of how they show up. Maybe they lack unconditional self-love with the way that they show up. That person would be focusing on the actions they aren't taking, and even the actions that they do take, they're not going to feel like that's good enough. When you lack unconditional self-love like that, that means that you tend to beat yourself up. So you are focusing on all the things that you are doing that you perceive as negative, you perceive as less than perfect. And when you do that, it's going to keep you stuck in life. Lacking unconditional self-love like that, lacking unconditional self-love leads to beating yourself up, which leads to keeping you stuck in life. And there's a couple different laws of the universe reasons as to why that leads us to keeping us stuck in our lives. The first law of the universe that I'll bring up that's relevant here is the law of focus. And so the law of focus is basically what you focus on expands, what you focus on you get more of. And so essentially, if you are always focusing on what you're not doing that you should be doing, or you feel you should be doing, right? Because this is all perception based. It's not rooted in truth. It's rooted in what you think, what you believe, and what you perceive to be true about yourself. It's not like actual like facts. Like fact is I just clapped my hands. It's not like a objective fact. It's a perception you have of yourself. And it's just it's a perception that's negative, essentially. Negative view of yourself. If you're constantly focused on those negative perceptions of you're not doing enough, even when you do stuff, it's not enough, right? So even though you're trying to take the action, it's still not enough, right? It's just more and more negative. That builds up. And so because you are focusing on the negative, you are creating more negative into your reality. So if you are constantly focusing on the negatives, you are going to create more negatives in your reality. So that's going to add in you having more obstacles and being more stuck in life. The second piece of that is when you're focused on the negatives and you are out of balance with unconditional self-love, you're beating yourself up, right? That is going to fuel your low self-image, right? Because they're related, but they're similar, but they're a little different. So your self-image is really the way that you view yourself. It's not about if you love yourself or not, but they correlate. So your self-image is just the way that you perceive yourself and the way that you believe others perceive you. Not the way people actually perceive you. It's the way you think people see you. But the funny thing is that our internal world reflects our external world. So the way that you see yourself is typically how other people will ultimately see you. So that's another reason why having a low self-image will keep you stuck in life. To break that down a little bit more, you'll fuel your low self-image by when you focus on the things that you're doing or the things that you're not doing, and things that you end up doing aren't good enough in your eyes. That's going to lower your self-image by doing that, because you're going to end up having less confidence in yourself because you don't feel that you're capable of doing the things that you think you should be doing to be successful. You think that even if you do, it's not good enough. So that's just, that's a lose-lose situation. So you're not going to have confidence in yourself to do things that you believe are enough or right. And then, like I just said, with you having that low self-image, people are going to reflect your self-image back to you. So the external world, people in life, they are going to perceive you as not enough. You don't think your actions are good enough? Well, other people are going to basically read your energy and reflect it back to you, even though people don't realize they're actually doing that. But they're going to read that you are not enough or you're not capable enough. So what that looks like in keeping you stuck in life is you're not going to end up getting a job that you want because the interviewer's not going to perceive you as capable enough. Or you're most likely not going to get the relationship that you want because you'll go on dead-end dates. People will think that you're not good enough because you don't think you're not good enough. Or because you don't think you're good enough, other people aren't going to see the value in you because you don't see the value in yourself. So they're likely going to not continue to see you. The relationship will fizzle out, or you could even become a match to something like your partner cheating on you or something like that. There's all these different dominoes that all stem. So if you think about it, like, this is a great way I would say to think about it, is that if you think about unconditional self-love and low self-image and how having low levels of both of these are keeping you stuck in life, you could think of those as like the roots of a tree that bring out branches that make you a match for those other negative things not working out, which is why you become stuck in life. So if you want to start changing your life around, start making the desirable progress that you want to positively change your life, start getting things working out in your favor, start progressing on your life goals, you have to raise your self-image and achieve unconditional self-love. This is exactly what I did, and I'll share my story so you can see exactly how to do it. And again, this is a work in progress, but it's something I've done a lot of work on. And so what I learned to do, don't make the same mistake I did, was that I focused on one area of life for this. And while it helped me in the initial phases, it brought me roadblocks down the line. So I would say the best thing you can do from the bat is focus on unconditional self-love and having a high self-image in all areas of life instead of focusing on one. And I think, honestly, try to start modeling it off the areas that you naturally have a higher self-image, and then go into the areas that are lower self-image. But you want to make this universal is the goal. You really want to have a 360 unconditional self-love perspective on yourself, and 360 high self-image of yourself in all areas, in all circumstances of your life. So what I did was, when I first started getting into this work, I realized that my dating life was as difficult as it was because I had a low self-image and I lacked unconditional self-love globally, 360 in all areas of my life. But because my love life was very important to me at that time, I put all my energy and focus into raising my self-image in relationships and achieving more self-love over really myself in how it would relate to me in relationships, if that makes sense. So basically, by doing more of the inner work and becoming more aware of the things that were happening in my subconscious, I was able to realize that I had a low self-image of myself in the sense of I compared myself to people a lot. And so if I didn't feel pretty enough or skinny enough or cool enough, like the cool girl, like just the fun, effortless, radiant kind of person, I would like compare myself to other people that I thought embodied those qualities better than I did. And so I would make that mean that I wasn't good enough, that I was less than. So I was very much caught in this comparison trap. And that was kind of the source of my low self-image, as well as societal programming. So because I had a low self-image, I would look for external proof to validate that I actually was enough and was worthy, instead of finding that within myself. So because of my low self-image, I internally didn't feel good about myself. So I tried to balance that out with external validation instead of going within. Here is exactly what I did to make these changes in my own life. So I lacked unconditional self-love and I had a low self-image in basically all areas of my life in some way or some form, but the source was really in how I looked. So I lacked unconditional self-love in my appearance, which led me to have a low self-image in dating, specifically because I tied my worthiness to dating and worthiness of how I was perceived by others and how I looked. So it wasn't, necessarily tied to who I was. It was tied to how I looked, which is like, that's, the societal programming coming into play. I struggled with comparing myself to others, but that was also a common thing that we were taught to do in society. If you think about women growing up, we're caught in comparison traps a lot. So that was something I really harped on a lot. And so if I compared myself to others, or I felt like I wasn't pretty enough or thin enough, or even like cool enough, really, it was kind of comparing myself to how others were treated and perceived. It was just a lot of comparison. I would feel less than, and I would perceive myself as less than. So the more that I didn't unconditionally love myself, in the sense of loving what I looked like, loving my features, loving my personality, loving my body, I would feel less than, which would lower my self-image. And because I felt less than, it made me feel not worthy of, it would make me feel not worthy of, the relationship that I wanted. But at the same time, I tried to find ways to balance it out with external validation. So to make myself feel more worthy, to make myself feel like I was more than enough, I would find other ways to validate my value, essentially, that I was pretty enough, skinny enough, or cool enough. And so that is kind of what led to me placing a lot of external importance on relationships. And so because of that, I ended up being in a lot of relationships, in the sense of I was more often in a relationship than I was single, because I felt more worthy when I was in a relationship, because that made me feel more wanted, versus when I was single, it made me feel not wanted. Which, it's funny when you say things like that out loud, because a lot of times we have these thoughts in our head that seem so believable in our head, but then when we say it out loud, we're like, what? That's why, it's so good to get your thoughts out onto paper, or just verbally. A lot of times people vent to their friends, but even if you just talk to yourself, or do an audio journal and you just get it out, you'll quickly see that a lot of the thoughts you have are irrational, or just don't really make logical sense. So, but that was the belief that I had. But because I was relying on external validation to feel like I was enough, there were ways that, even though I was in a relationship, there were things that would happen to reflect back that I didn't feel that I was enough. And so, or that I didn't love myself, which is why I attracted, things like cheating in past relationships, and things like abuse, physical and mental abuse in past relationships, because I didn't unconditionally love myself, because I beat myself up. Because when you are internally beating yourself up, you can be a match for getting beat up physically or mentally by another person, because the energetic and the spiritual are one and the same, essentially. So for anything that is here in real life, there's an energetic component to it, and vice versa. So anything that's energetic, there's a physical component to it as well. It's like a counterpart. Anyways, once I started to shift this is how I started to shift my love life. So when I started to find the things that I loved about my physical appearance, my body, my personality, the things that made me me, I started to focus on the positive aspects, which created more positive things in my life, which ultimately improved my confidence, which made my energy more attractive in my dating life. So that was a big thing. I stopped comparing myself to others. It still happens. I catch myself. We're not perfect, but I became aware of it, and now I'm able to catch myself when I'm doing it and kind of shift that and change the thought track that goes on in my head around that kind of stuff. I started to slowly build up my self-love. Heard in my last podcast episode, I wrote on my vision board that in 2021, when I had my first manifestation spiritual awakening year, I wrote that I wanted to achieve self-love. So what I had to do was stop stacking up the negatives and start adding in positives to balance the scales. By starting to add in more positives, I started to love myself more, and I started to view myself more positively, so that raised my self-image. So because my self-image was raised internally, I externally was starting to have people treat me better because my self-image was better, and I talked to myself better, and because I talked to myself better, I treated myself better. And so it just became this whole domino effect. Because I improved my self-image, other people treated me better. Specifically in my love life, I started getting better treatment from from people that I would go on dates with. And then I ultimately attracted a relationship that was up to the standards that I wanted for myself, where I was treated like I was more than enough, that I was perfect. I started getting the high quality treatment that I really wanted from a partner, because I started loving myself that way, because I started viewing myself as worthy and deserving of that kind of love. So this helped me also progress in my life, because I ended up improving a lot of the conditions in my career and in my finances that way. And even a lot of my friendships improved as well when I started doing this work. For example, even though and then kind of relating that self-image work that I did, it actually improved my career, because even though I had a better self-image with my ability to get jobs in HR, I was attracting a lot of difficult experiences and obstacles in my career in HR. In that first job I had very difficult managers that I worked with. There was a lot of drama things happening with the people that in the program that I was with. It was a very difficult experience in a lot of ways. And when I look back now, I believe that people were reflecting back to me the things that I was beating myself up for, even though they weren't necessarily true. They were my perception, that it wasn't enough and all of these things. They were reflecting that back to me. And because I had a low self-image, they didn't perceive me as valuable either. And so it was so interesting, because I had always wondered, why am I doing good work, but I'm getting told that I'm not doing enough, or that I'm just doing the bare minimum or whatever it was, And then ultimately, when I had left that job, I thought that moving to my new job, because I got that new job easily because I had a better self-image and self-perception, of myself in that type of career, I got the job easily. But then your low self-image, when it's in other areas of life, it'll penetrate through. So that ultimately would penetrate through. And I ended up attracting, at first it was all great, and then I started to attract kind of weird obstacles that didn't necessarily make sense. It's interesting because I would attract like little obstacles. So it's interesting, actually, self-reflecting. When I started doing this work in 2021, I started to improve that more and more. So the more that I improved my self-image in 2021, the more successful I was at my job, not necessarily the physical work that I was doing, because I was always doing the work, but the way that it was perceived was more valuable. So that ultimately led to me being like the top performer in the year in review ratings, which didn't happen for me really back at my old job, but I was still working the same. And then that led to me getting promoted. And when I got promoted, I'd done a lot of that self-image work. So yes, I got the promotion. I got, really good salary increases and all of that stuff. And then that's what led me to having the best manager that I ever had. I mean, he was literally one of the best managers I've ever had. If I were to work for somebody again, I would work for him. And I attracted 2 really good coworkers that were great friends of mine. And that was the best job that I'd ever had in my 8 years of the career. And I believe truly that it was because of all this self-image work I did, I was recognized better, recognized as more valuable. So the work that I was doing was actually being seen positively because I was seeing myself positively. And then because I focused on all the great things that I was doing and being and who I was, I would create better experiences for myself as well over time. So I would stop attracting so many negative obstacles because I wasn't focusing on the negative all the time. The key is that you want to have unconditional self-love in all ways of yourself. You don't want to just perceive yourself highly in one area and not another, because it will creep in one way or another. And without unconditional self-love, you will not have a high self-image. And so you need to have both. But I would say that you need to have unconditional self-love first before you can change your self-image. They're related and you can't have one without the other, but you need the self-love first before you can switch your image. And so that really starts with meeting yourself where you're at. So this episode is all about like how, you're not where you want to be in life. So you have to kind of accept that. You have to accept that you're not where you're at in your life, but you have to find the positives in that. So you have to balance out all those negatives with positives, right? So because you're too focused on the negative, if you weren't stuck in life, if you're stuck in life, you are too focused on the negative in whatever area that might be. So you have to start coming to a level of acceptance by adding in more positives into your life so that you're not like loving this stuck thing of your life, right? Because that's still out of balance, but you're kind of neutral and you accept it and you're good with it. Like you're kind of like content, but you also know that you're ready for more is kind of the state that I would describe it as. And so I did this as well. Like when I started, this was one of the first things that I did to achieve self-love. And so what I did was, when I had that hip surgery and I was stuck at home and I started, learning about manifestation and spirituality and all of that stuff, I knew that I was in a pretty bad place. Like I said, right? I moved back home. I couldn't walk or shower or go up the stairs without needing help. I couldn't drive. I didn't like how I looked. I didn't like how I felt. I had a lot of, guilt, shame, and regret on things from my past. Like I was just not in a good place. And so I knew I couldn't get out of that place until I made peace with it. And so I found ways to love and appreciate that time. And for a time that felt as shitty as it did, I can look back and find these positive things that made it a really happy, pleasant time in my experience. And I wouldn't have that if I didn't balance out the positives and the negatives. And because I got to such a neutrality place, and I started to forgive myself for things that got me into those situations, forgive myself from the past, love myself, appreciate myself, find the positives in the situation, how this was going to help me in the future, like all of that stuff, I was able to get out of that situation so fast. Like the way that I shifted timelines was incredibly, incredibly quick to go from not liking how I looked, being on crutches, having a potentially slow healing process, not liking basically anything of my life, to ultimately, I improved all of my friendships. All my friendships improved. I actually lost a lot of energetic weight. It was actually crazy. Like, I wasn't able to work out. I wasn't able to move my body at all because I was on crutches, right? So I was sitting a lot, and I actually was so worried that I wouldn't be able to. I was actually so worried that I would gain weight because I wasn't exercising and I was such a big exerciser. So I was like so worried about that I actually lost a ton of energetic weight because I did all of this work. Because a lot of times we store fat in our bodies because we are beating ourselves up or we are holding on to things from the past. So because I did all of this shifting of forgiving myself for the past and I stopped beating myself up and made peace where I was at, I lost a lot of weight because I was holding on to energetic weight. So my body improved, my relationships improved. I actually healed faster than my doctor expected. I got off crutches a few weeks earlier than I thought. I was able to drive weeks earlier than I thought. I was able to start lifting weights and running quicker than my timeline was expected. So I actually healed faster. I ultimately was able to move to San Diego, so I was able to get out of living in my parents' home where I didn't want to live anymore, and I was able to move to San Diego, and I moved into a gorgeous condo that I really wanted to live in, and I attracted my dream partner. I did all of that in 6 months from being at my lowest to like my life was unrecognizable from January to September. I was in San Diego, so my life did a complete 180, and I was able to do that by unconditional self-love and raising my self-image. But this work is lifelong, right? So I did that in 2021, right? And then I told you guys I started to, if you listened to my previous episode, I told you guys I started to plateau. So that was because I only focused on how I looked and how I was perceived by people in terms of if I was pretty or skinny or cool and whatever, all that stuff. And I wanted to improve my love life. But then I stopped doing that kind of stuff. I fell off the unconditional self-love train. I fell off the self-image work train in a sense. So like while my love life, I did so much reprogramming in that area that I was able to shift my subconscious in a way that became my new state of being. I didn't have to do too much to maintain having a high self-image in my love life. My relationship was in a pretty steady place, obviously, for years, and here I am married, but it wasn't healed in other areas of life. So as I started to have bigger goals and things like that, these obstacles would come back. So if you listen to my previous episode, I talked about how as I started becoming more and more of an expert in manifestation and spirituality and psychology, neuroscience, all of this kind of laws of the universe kind of stuff, I became really proficient in it, and I wanted to start teaching it, and I started Marea Manifest in 2023. My low self-image stuff came back because while before I had put a lot of my low self-image perception of myself in how I looked and how I was perceived in my love life and things like that, it came back in how I was perceived in being a manifestation coach and being a business owner and just things like that. So then the things repeated because I didn't do it globally. I didn't do the unconditional self-love globally. I only did it in 1 or 2 areas max, really. And, it stemmed in other areas too. And so you bring in the wedding that happened, my wedding year. There you go again. The unconditional self-love was not mastered in pieces of my social area of life. And so I had a lot of things come up to show me where my low self-image and my unconditional self-love was lacking in my social area of life and my financial area of life. And then top it off with my career area of life. And so that is ultimately what led me on a big unconditional self-love journey for this past year in order to reach my full potential, which is what this podcast is all about, and why I'm telling you that if you're not where you want to be in life, it's because you lack unconditional self-love, and why you are stuck in life because you don't have unconditional self-love for yourself and you have a low self-image, right? So essentially what you need to do, right? Let's recap. What you need to do is you have to start balancing things out to an equal amount of positives and negatives. Get to a balanced place, get to a neutral place about things in your life from the perception of you, right? Like get to a balanced place about where you're at in your career and the things that you do great in the career and the things that you maybe don't love at your career, right? Like you don't want to be out of balance in one or the other because, you might be wondering, like, well, what if I have too many positive things about my career? What's the issue in that? The issue in that is that it usually comes from more of an ego state. If you find that you are looking at all these positives and you're not seeing any negatives, you're out of balance, and it's probably because your ego is protecting you from things underlying the surface. And it's not actually true. So if you're out of balance in one way or the other, it means you are lacking unconditional self-love. And if you really think that you could do no wrong and you are perfect and everything that you do is perfect in the sense of it's all positive, it means you're not willing to look at something. You're not willing to face something. And it could mean that it could also really set you up for a conditional love type of thing, because if something does happen, because ultimately the universe will put you into balance. So if something does happen to balance you out to a negative, you will beat yourself up because you have a conditional love mindset. So essentially, that's to kind of recap the unconditional self-love, right? Start looking at yourself in all areas of life. So make sure you do a full perspective of yourself unconditionally, self-love wise, of looking at all the positive and the negative things, but not being like, oh, I love that I exercise 5 times a week and I hate that I procrastinate all the time. It's not about that. It's more coming to a place of like accepting that. So accepting that you procrastinate and being like, yeah, so I know that I'm really creative, but I'm also really bad with time. But because I am not the best with time, it allows me to get into more of a creative flow. So kind of like finding a balance between the two. Not necessarily being like, I hate this and I love this. It's more of like a getting to a place of neutrality with both, if that makes sense. And then, so that's kind of the recap, the unconditional self-love. And then the self-image is the way you perceive yourself and the way that you think others perceive you. You want to be able to perceive yourself. If you have a high self-image, that means that you believe in yourself, that you're able to, whatever you want in this beautiful life, you believe in yourself enough to be able to get it. You believe that you're capable and that you're worthy of it. You deserve it. Basically, you're not limiting yourself or your capabilities, and you like who you are, right? Like you are very familiar with the things about you and what makes you unique and special, and you're able to really be at a place where I'm like, yeah, I really like this version of me, like things like that. That would be how I would summarize kind of the self-image and the unconditional self-love. So basically what you can start doing to start making shifts in your life today is start using the law of focus to work in your favor. So if you are somebody that really resonates with, man, I really do pay way more attention to the negatives than the positives. If that's you, you are not alone. Literally, I used to do that all the time. I still can go back to doing that if I don't pay attention and catch this, especially when I bring in like something new that I'm doing. Like whenever it's bringing in something new, I have to really remind myself of this. And also our human brain from a neuroscience perspective is wired to focus more on the negatives than the positives, just because of the fight or flight and how we're wired with that from like a primitive place. We're not focused on the positives because that's not like going to help us survive. We're looking more for threats. So that's why our brain is looking more to the negative. So you're not alone. That's natural. But what you can do is start intentionally adding this into, your morning routine or your night routine. Use the law of focus to work in your favor. Start taking like stock of things that you did today that you did like, that things did go well. It can be really small, but typically we're already pretty aware of the things that we perceive as negative. So really the focus is to bring more in of the positive. It could be really small. Like maybe you were supposed to run at the gym and you only walked. You normally beat yourself up for that. Instead, be like, you know what? I'm proud of myself that I showed up for the gym instead of not showing up at all. So it's like things like that. That's going to help you law of focus to create more positive in your life, and just start to change your perspective too, like change your perception of yourself, because then you're going to start being more proud of yourself. And when you're more proud of yourself, you start to perceive yourself as more capable. And then the second thing is before you make any changes, you have to start being aware of where you are now. So becoming a master observer of your thoughts is huge, huge. So much of your thoughts are subconscious. I mean, I don't even know off the top of my head, but We think so many thoughts a day, and a lot of times we have like the conscious thought, but we have like 5 other thoughts subconsciously that we're not even listening to. Especially like in today's day and age, like we're so overstimulated, we're usually multitasking, doing 5 different things at once. So it's really hard to catch those subconscious thoughts, and really that's where the most impactful work is the subconscious ones, because we create our reality. From 95% of our reality comes from our subconscious brain, and really the way that we move and operate in life is based on the subconscious. Like, if you don't think, it is scientifically proven, say you think you're really bad at math and you have that belief, you will do bad math. Like, that's how you will show up, that's how you will move. But if you start to find the things in math that you are good at, like, oh, I did this, that was great, that was successful, and you start to do that, you'll shift your perception, you'll actually start to be better at math. So that's why you want to really pay attention to the subconscious. So become a master observer of your thoughts. That's the second thing. So the first one was using the law of focus to start noticing the positives, and the second thing was become a master observer of your thoughts. Just start to notice the subconscious ones, just anything that comes up. Honestly, just make a note in your phone and just write it down. Like, just start noticing. And the second you start noticing, maybe even take it a step further and say it out loud. Like, for example, you could be, say that you are in a business meeting and you wanted to raise your hand because you had an idea that you wanted to share, but then you had a thought in the back of your head and it was like, no, I can't share that. What if it's stupid? Like, I don't know, remember that one time I said something and no one agreed with me? Like, you'll have thoughts like that in the background, and it's going to stop you from raising your hand. So you have to first become aware that you even have that thought first before you start adding it in. But what you do is, after you spend some time observing those thoughts, you're starting to become aware of them, that's when you add in things to oppose that thought, do the opposite. So instead of being like, oh, I gotta stop saying these negative things about myself, I have to stop beating myself up, instead add in positive things that you do. Start focusing on responding back to yourself in a positive way, because there's something that goes on in our brains when we think we have to take something away, that it kind of triggers our like flight or fight kind of thing. Like think about nutrition coaches. Instead of like the people who change their diets to be healthier, they are typically more successful if they focus on adding in vegetables instead of taking out the processed foods or kind of things like that. So that's kind of what you want to do with your thoughts, instead of like being like, no, I can't stop. I said this, fuck, man, what the hell? Why did I say that? You add in, just be like, nope, it's okay. It's okay that I said that because I'm realizing it's actually not true because of this. Or you could say, all right, yeah, maybe that did happen once, but then remember when this happened? Like, that was really cool. Like, yeah, maybe one time I said something and no one agreed with me, but remember that other time when I brought this up and then somebody decided to move that idea forward, like if you were in that business meeting example. So basically what you want to do is things to start implementing in your life today. I would say every night, journal, write down, even if it's just a few notes in your phone, things that you did that you're proud of, things that went well. And then throughout your day, actively notice and clock the thoughts that you're having that are, beating yourself up or kind of just a negative connotation, things that you like you would perceive as a negative thought. Start becoming aware of those, and then kind of write down or say to yourself the opposite thought, so that you can start adding in the more positive thoughts and kind of like pattern interrupting that talk track. That's what you can start doing to start to progress on your journey to unconditional self-love and raising your self-image. It's not an overnight thing, but it is the most rewarding and fulfilling thing you'll ever do. It's your key to success in life. Like, if I could say anything that's your key to success in life, it's having unconditional self-love and having a high self-image. That is going to move the needle on allowing you to get where you want to go. And that's what changed my life too. If you have specific questions you want to talk about, comment below. If you have something else that you want me to share about in a future podcast episode, a different concept you want me to talk through, or if you want me to talk about this in a deeper way, let me know. I'd love to hear. And then if you enjoyed this podcast, if you got any value out of it, it would mean the world to me if you could rate this a 5-star review and hit the follow button. And that is how we can keep this podcast going, so that I can continue bringing this value, this knowledge, these life-changing tools with you, and I continue to help you reach your full potential in this life. Feel free to head to mareamanifest.com if you want to work with me. I have a couple different sessions that I offer that will help you reach your full potential, help you release these type of self-image and unconditional self-love blocks like we talked about today. I also have a newsletter on there that you can subscribe to. I offer exclusive free trainings to people on my email list, and I also offer exclusive VIP discounts on there as well. So, all right, thanks for listening, and we'll talk in the next episode. All right, bye.